Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the third entry in our Learning Engineering Speaker Series. And today we're joined by an inspiring voice in the world of education and leadership, Annasofie Møller. Annasofie is a Danish educator and learning consultant whose work bridges the worlds of pedagogy, didactics, and organizational development. With experience at institutions like the Royal Danish Defence College in the capital region of Copenhagen, she's been instrumental in shaping educator and leadership development programs that prioritize depth, empathy, and innovation. She's also a NATO Deep instructor and a consultant for the Partnership for Peace Consortium, bringing her insights to international conversations on transformative learning and civic literacy. Her work explores psychological safety, reflective practice, and the ethical dimensions of digital and military education. And we are very honored to have her with us today. Annasofie, welcome.
And I will turn this on.
Yep, you're all set.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Spencer. It sounds so nice when you put it that way. So thank you for that very kind introduction. So I'll just see if I can share this. And can you just tell me, Spencer, is it looking okay?
Yep, that looks great. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So today we'll be talking about this subject at the edge of competence, transformative learning and heutagogy for military professionals. So what we'll be taking a closer look at is how transformative learning and heutagogy, also known as self-determined learning, can be applied in higher military education and training. And some of the steps we'll be walking through are, if we take just a gaze into the crystal ball, what are the required competencies of the future soldiers? We will be looking at what learning approaches do we have that can support the moving in that direction. I will also introduce you to a few concrete examples of what that might look like, and we will be working with trainable dilemmas, all with the goal to guide learners towards their edge of competency. So just a brief little introduction. Spencer, you already said all the nice things, but yes, I work with the organizational leadership and educator development. And for the last couple of years, I've been particularly interested in those who hold position with high emotional demands, such as soldiers, healthcare personnel, first responders. So all of these professionals that can navigate in high risk and complex contexts. And I know that sometimes my area of expertise and interest doesn't sound that interesting, or it doesn't scream rock and roll, at least. So that's why I chose this photo of myself in mountain bike gear and my Aussie outfit to compensate for that. I am currently living in Nuuk in Greenland, living and working there, and I am, as you will see, certainly not above, sprinkling some nice photos of Greenland on this presentation. So, well, what we'll be focusing on is the question of how to best lead and train those people with high emotional demands that find themselves often in high risk and complex situations. We will be focusing mainly on those that work on an operational and strategic level. But as my favorite online yoga instructor says, whoever knows Yoga of Adrian, hi guys, take what you need and then just leave what you don't, because, you know, some of this presentation hopefully will hit the mark and other bits won't. So yeah, that was my invitation. Just take what you need and leave what you don't. So first, I'm just going to spend a few minutes on just setting the scene here, and I'm going to invite you in to do that. So as I said, if we just take a gaze into the crystal ball, then what are the required skills and competencies of military personnel working at that level? So I know a lot of you is probably working within this field as well, so you probably have some very qualified answers to this question, but I'm just asking you to just sit and reflect for a second in your experience. Then what are the required skills and competencies of that military personnel? And I forgot to say, that's why I put the little logo on a notebook up in my first slide, but I constantly forgot to say this. But if you're the type that likes to reflect by writing by hand, then it's a good idea if you have that within your reach, because I'm going to do that a few times, just asking you just to think of a question. And probably I will guess that when you were reflecting on this, you came up with something like this. So we really want them to be good problem solvers, right? We like to put them in various contexts with different problems and see them work through that. We would like to see them being very good at adapting to different situations and contexts and scenarios. And we like them to do that, navigating those different scenes and scenarios quite fluently, being able to adapt to what happens. And up until the point where a decision has been made, of course, it's also important for them to be able to critically reflect and also to discuss, to constantly look for different and better outcomes. We need them to excel at cooperating too, but last but not least, we also want them to be able to learn really well from what takes place in practice. So by that, I mean when they're solving the task, when they're navigating that, when something comes up that didn't go according to plan, that didn't go the way that they imagine it would, they need to be very good to look at that, pick up the pieces, and then make a new plan, constantly learning from what takes in practice. And of course, in the military system, we already have structures put up to support that. Structures such as lessons identified, lessons learned. We also have, of course, after actions review, but just like general, the habit of debriefing is something that supports that. All of this while, of course, being critical thinkers. So I'm hoping that some of these things were what came to mind to you as well. If that's the case, then according to NATO doctrine anyways, you'll be absolutely right. So if we look at some of these highlighted words, of course, innovative thinking, adaptability, coordinating planning, right? Critical thinking as well. So if we just take your ideas, NATO doctrine, and then use that to bridge our way for transformative learning. Well, first of all, if we look at the competency of the skill of being adaptable, we know it requires learners to be able to challenge, to reframe existing meaning structures when contexts change. Meaning structures being one of the core starting points from Jack Masarov when we talk about transformative learning. Also, critical thinking. As a critical thinker, it involves that you constantly are able to question what are we already seeing now, what are the underlying ideas, premises, and not just focus on what is already predefined as problems. Acting resiliently also means to be able to, of course, as I already said, learning from what takes place in a way that you didn't expect and coping with those setbacks and uncertainties. And of course, also cooperation. That does require from time to time that you look at your own perspectives and yourself critically and assess what others are bringing to the table. So the question is really, that's all great, but how do we train that? And transformative learning would be focusing on transformative learning would be one way of approaching that. So just to bridge that, I would like to begin with sharing a story. And this situation took place a few years ago. I was teaching a group of cadets. It might as well just be, a group of military established leaders, but this was a group of cadets. And the theme that we were working on was inclusive leadership. So how to exercise that, what to be mindful of, what to take into consideration. And that was the subject we were exploring. And the mood was kind of like is this really a problem? When we talk about diversity and minority and inclusion and being able to navigate that as leaders, is that really a problem in the defense? Because we say things like there's no gender in the defense, there's only soldiers. So there's no categories in the defense, there's soldiers. So it was kind of the feel of a little bit of a disbelief. Is this really necessary? So I played a clip of a podcast for them, and this clip was about a female soldier that shared the story from one of her deployments in Afghanistan. And the story was just her first-hand experience with being excluded from the group because of being a minority. And she shares these various examples, and the story really escalates when she shares the situation. She walks into mass, and there's a bunch of her colleagues sitting there, and two of them are being very funny at her expense. And like sometimes, of course, humor, we use it to include, but this was clearly made as comments and jokes, meaning to put her outside the community of practice. And what she reacted towards, and this is in hindsight for her, wasn't really the fact that those two were sitting there mouthing off. It had everything to do with those soldiers sitting there that she considered her very close friends. She sat there, didn't say anything. So that's some of the stories, and that's the clip that I played. And then I followed that up by showing some of the current research we have with on the minorities, inclusion, and diversity in the defense. And still, the mood was kind of like, well, is that really the case? Because you could see that for some of the cadets, especially the ones that fit the box, that on the outside anyway, didn't seem to belong to a minority. And they were really questioning because it didn't match the current image and their experience of being in the defense so far. And then this really remarkable thing happened. Those who didn't tick the box, so to say, or fit in the box, those that did belong to a minority in the defense, they actually started changing the conversation. So they started speaking up, saying, well, actually, when we heard this story, we do have some matching stories. We do have experiences of some of the same things. And then remarkable thing number two happened, that the first group of guests, they just leaned into those stories that they were sharing, telling about their experiences, and they were really curious. So what happened? What did you say? What was the context? Who was involved? What happened next? What was the aftermath? How did you feel about that? How would you do that in a different situation if it ever happens again? What feeling did it leave you with? Questions like that. So the conversation started to shift from sharing stories to being really interested to moving to, okay, as future leaders in the defense, how do we navigate that? Of course, what do we, do when confronted with a situation? But also, what about all of those things we don't see? What about all the things we don't hear about? What is our role, and how do we gain that knowledge and gain that insight? So that was my little story to start you off, and I hope you're still there. I would like for you now to reflect on anything that you noticed in particular about this story. Anything that happened to you that was similar as to my experience with the group of learners? And was there anything that surprised you? So just to see if we can get the chat going here before I use this story to take us into more details about transformative learning and what that might look like. And Spencer, can you help me out here? Is there coming anything interesting up in the chat? I know it's a little bit early maybe, but just seeing if we get some inputs.
Jill is just saying that it's interesting that they leaned in and they connected.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I very much agree. And this is where the good stuff happens, right? Because it could have gone either way.
We have another comment from JC. It seems to me that there are two key parts to this happening. People need to share their experiences, and other people need to be willing to listen and learn.
Mm-hmm. That's brilliantly put. And this is what's so interesting about this story as well, because, you know, one goal for the cadets could have just been, you know, I want to be right. I want my experience, and I want my worldview to be right. Right? I can either do that, but then sometimes it's just not about being right. It's about leaning in and learning and sharing perspectives.
We have another comment from Lieutenant Navy Mackenzie. All the after questions through can lead to a person having to reliving the issue and go through it all over again.
Yes, also very true. Was there a question there?
I do believe it was just a comment. And
Yeah.
Another comment from Lieutenant Rue is, I find interesting that people connect and are more open to the conversation after they hear stories of people they know.
Yeah. All of them very interesting and great things that you noticed, and I would like for this conversation to continue. How I'm going to use this story just as a lens and just to get you going. Thank you so much to all of you who shared in the comment. So I said this story can serve as a lens for us to understand and see the process of transformative learning through. And for these next little bits, I'm of course leaning back on everything Jack Mesereau did, but I'm also using a lot of elements from the brilliant work of Emily Claret from École de Guerre. They've worked a lot with transformative learning and have gained some great and very interesting insights. So if you try to define transformative learning, you know, a bit more in detail, it can be understood as the process of changing meaning structures, that being what we assume, all of our assumptions, our expectations, and through critical reflection on content, process, and premises, right? Being able to change those meaning structures. Sometimes I refer to them as the lenses that we see things through. And I also find it important just to note down, it is not about becoming someone else. It's about being able to reshape your frame of reference to understand the situation you find yourself in, yourself and others in new ways. And what it enables us to do is just to shift in those frames of reference, so we can move from what can be referred to as a more tactical mindset, doing things right, to a more operational and strategic mindset where you're more concerned with finding the right thing to do. How do we decide that and investigating that area? So, you know, just moving on a bit, when we want to create situations where transformative learning can take place, it often happens on the edge of competence. That being understood, that you find yourself in situations and in a context when your experience change, how you think, act, and understand yourself, right? So we are looking for being disoriented. We're looking for this mismatch, so to speak, in those situations when we look to when we look for transformative learning. So again, situations, sometimes it's also something you can think of as routines no longer working for you, right? So what you just automatically will do or think, well, it collides, so to speak, with the situations that you find yourself in. And sometimes when you look for it, it can seem like an inner conflict, right? It's just there's certain something feels off, right? the lens that you usually seeing and understanding yourself and others through, it doesn't fit anymore. Your perspective doesn't fit anymore. So if we just take a look at the theoretical process of transformative learning, it can look something like this. First, we'll have a situation, or as Messerov calls, a disorienting dilemma. This situation challenges your meaning structures, right? And it pushes you to reflect on and discuss this matter, and also, and this is very critical, taking in others and new perspectives. This can lead to better understanding, to see now, why isn't my view fitting anymore? And that can also, and I say can because it's not a given, change behavior. So if we look at the story that I shared with you, we go from, is this really a problem? Probably not. And then with the stories that they shared, we go on to exploring what we haven't noticed and also why, because at the edge of competence, this is sometimes where blind spots and biases and privileges they live. Right? So that was also a part of the conversation. Why haven't we discovered this? What do we do as leaders if we're not told this? And again, yes, how to navigate that. And again, so this was the story, and all stories doesn't necessarily fit, but you can take guess that the next time the cadets would find themselves in situations where these dilemmas were on the table, they probably would have some other ways of acting in that situation. Okay, so now maybe you're thinking, okay, Annasofie, that sounds great, or, well, that sounds terrible, or hopefully you maybe also think this is interesting, and you start to wonder, what would that look like in a teaching setting, and how do we move towards that? And so just let me back up a bit. So if we go from NATO doctrine, the demanded and required skills and competencies of those military personnel, and then we look at, so if that's what we demand, how do we train that? How do we integrate and apply that in a teaching setting? And this is what we'll be trying to look at now. So I chose this image because this is what a lot of us do. And I think the first way to go about it is that we try just to do a little bit less of this. Right? I felt tempted to include this quote from Donald Clark, that nobody picks up skills in the classroom, which of course is a truth with many, many modifications. But if we just zoom in on this photo, I bet that a lot of you recognize this very well. And if we take this and put this into a broader learning theory scope, then that would fit really well with the blue box. The blue box is where we have predetermined teaching and learning. Well, definitely predetermined teaching. Learning is, of course, never a given in most situations. So if we have this, and this approach is a classic. We all know this one, right? It's more educator-centered. Me being the sage on the stage, I deliver, you receive, right? That motion. So I'm not saying don't do that, obviously, but what I'm saying is when it comes to transformative learning, it does really have some challenges. And so first of all, when I'm taking in the sage is the stage on the stage position, a lot of the time I will have a predetermined plan, right? This is the goal. This is how we're going to do it. This is what I'm going to say, and then you're going to do and say this, right? So we have a plan that we often don't steer too much away from, which means most of the times I will be dosing knowledge, and even sometimes, dare I say, overdosing. And this is what we know, of course, is information overload. That's one thing. Another thing is that when we lecture, we provide a lot of answers. We provide a lot of facts, right? And sometimes these are answers to which people haven't yet asked the questions. They're simply not ready, and that makes sure that, or doesn't make sure, but it sometimes makes us miss the mark. So if we go from this scenario and towards a more self-determined teaching and learning scenario, heutagogy and transformative learning, instead of it being educator-centered, it's very much learner and practice-centered, meaning you'd concern yourself with inviting in as much as possible all of the learners' prerequisites. Where have they been? What have they experienced? What dilemmas have they found themselves in? And also the practice. Right now, what are they trying to navigate? The task that they're solving, what does it look like? Where does it become difficult? And this is often where, of course, transformative learning has a place, because we are using the learners themselves and their practice as a starting point for how we design and the lessons.
Just to interrupt, sorry, Annasofie, we did have a comment in the chat from Captain Ransom. It's like, based on the requirement of a set of learned perspectives to examine under a reframing approach through transformative learning, how can we apply this methodology to cadets with limited military operational perspective to study or problem solve?
So always, thank you for this question. We'll just, spend a little time on that. So if we look at this model, normally you'll have, you'll place the learners. Where are they doing? Is it right now about doing the right thing or doing things right? So I'm saying that if and of course, I steered you off the track a little bit with my story being about cadets, because that would very much be a more mixed approach. But when you are trying to move someone towards the edge of competence and being able to train that, you will find in with the cadets, what dilemmas might they face, right? And for some, right now, is it more about cooperation? Maybe. Is it more about, so when we're being agile, it's not really on the battlefield. It is maybe more in, being able to study and cooperate. So this, of course, that is all the hard work of the instructors finding out. So where could there be windows of opportunity to have a more learner and practice-centered approach? So what I did with cadets, with subjects like, basic leadership training, talking about motivation, everything, like really psychology was fitting really well. It was quite easy to also harvest these experiences from them that I'll show you in the next bit. But it is within, I will say, in my perspective, and if somebody sees something differently, please add that in the chat as well. But with cadets particularly, it's about finding those areas where transformative learning is interesting. So if we take cases, trainable scenarios about motivation, for instance, something like that would work really well. Could that be used?
Thank you.
Thank you. So now moving towards a more concrete example of what might that look like. And I'm just going to, I'm actually going to use you as well, and I'm going to guide you through the steps. So here's an example of how that might be done. So taking a starting point in the learners and their practice, what we will search for is learning opportunities, right? We'll, look at those situations and dilemmas they found themselves in that they found difficult. And so I have an exercise for you. And of course, this is designed for us. But what I would like for you to do, and you can either, just write it by hand, use your notebook if you want to quietly reflect. You're also more than welcome to share these ideas in the chat. Then for some, it might be nice to get some good ideas. But what I would like for you to do is just to take a little uncomfortable stroll down memory lane, where you think of a situation that you yourself have been in, either in the role as an educator or a leader, and the group, they did not respond to whatever you're coming with the way you hoped, right? Maybe the group fell silent. Maybe they showed signs of resistance or disengagement. And in this situation, you question how to navigate this best, right? You're looking for, but you're a little bit unsure. How do I respond adequately in this moment? What's the best thing to do? And we have about 2 minutes where we can open up the chat, or you can just reflect quietly. So I'm looking for, situations that look something like this.
We do have a couple comments in the chat, but I was wondering if you wanted to wait to allow people to reflect more, or would you like me to read those out loud?
Just if we can just spare a minute for people just to, get their mental ducks in a row and think of a situation. And then I would love for you, if you will, just, just pick one or two just for us to see. That would be great.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you. Could you read a few examples to me, please? That would be brilliant.
Sure. A couple of comments were: engage the audience and ask them questions. I have used humor at times.
Mm-hmm.
And then an actual example provided was: my stark example involved a group who completely refused to do a planned activity because it hit too close to the heart emotionally. So instead of the activity, I engaged in a debrief with them on the feelings that caused them to refuse.
Great. Thank you so much. You're already, jumping to how do we solve this? How do we navigate this? Thank you very much, and thank you for playing along and sharing in the chat and reflecting as well. So, of course, this is a situation. I'm just putting in this to hopefully look for some dilemmas of standing in situations where, like, I didn't expect this as an educator. What to do now, right? So what we're trying to look for when we do this is steering towards edges of competencies where we got a little bit like, this situation makes me uncomfortable. Of course, you will always change that into whatever goals you're trying to obtain, whatever it is you're working with, maybe whatever that you observed in the learners that could be good for them to train more. Normally when I do this, if I have an hour and a half, that's sufficient to, to have people write in their answers. Normally I like to use Learn MentiLab.net, or Menti is fine too, and then just get in the answers instantly. And then what I will do is now show you how you can, harvest all of those dilemmas and situations and stories and turn those into trainable dilemmas or trainable scenarios. And again, I don't have an hour and a half, and 45 minutes is really pushing it. But all you need is 10 minutes, really, a short break, and then you'll be able to do this more live. So I hope you forgive me. But I have stolen a few stories to some of your fellow colleagues that we will be looking at. So just briefly to walk you through, what does it look like? You gather dilemmas, right? Then you look at what key issues do we have here? What is there anything that seems as if they have this in common? This could be worth talking about. Then what cases do you want to use? You refine them, you change them up, and then you train the scenario. So that's really just the process that you go through. And the prompt that I'm using looks something like this. I like to use ChatGPT, but any old music will do, really. So you feed it first information about the target group. Who are they? What is the education? Maybe if you have like a bigger goal. Then I like to put in like the pedagogical baseline, so to speak, right? Transformative learning, Heutagogy. A lot of the time I use self-determination theory as well, just to let it have a. And then the goal is to do scenario-based training, or to create trainable dilemmas. I prompt the ChatGPT to create teachable moments, and also in that, maybe being very mindful of show, don't tell. I also normally ask them to see if it can find tendencies and maybe combine those issues from stories that can make like a longer case to train. Then I always ask them to put in reflection questions for the groups to discuss, and then to always sort of have a devil's advocate questions. And then most of the time I have to ask it to show, don't tell again. I don't want it to, give away all of the answers. And navigating as a military leader, you don't have all the answers and the insights, and you can't see what people think or feel. I'll show you the entire prompt in the next slide in teeny tiny letters, but it's just to let you know that if you want to try this on for size, you can just receive the presentation and you just copy paste and use that. Looks like this. And so again, I hope you forgive me for just using some other stories than the ones that you reflected on, the ones you put in the chat. But maybe it's something that you can recognize, and I just want to show you a concrete example. What is the process like? What does it look like? So one situation from a fellow educator is this: that this person came prepared for a session and was really focused on critical reflection. Let's debate, let's discuss, right? And they were just, interrupting, going like, why don't you just tell us what to do? Right? You have a plan, you're the expert, why don't you just tell us what to do? And then the whole, nice thing you were trying to achieve as an educator didn't really happen. I was unsure, like, how do I deal with this in the best way? Of course, as educators, a lot of us, we have we know what we're going to do, but still we can have some conflict about do these habits, do they still work for me? So the case that ChatGPT will deliver will look something like this. And I'll just give you a minute to read, just to see what that looks like, and then I'll give you another example. So this is example number 2. And this leader educator was leading an exercise. And so the relevance of what I was doing, what I was trying to teach, what I was trying to say, or what I was trying to demonstrate was questions. Is this really relevant? And I'm thinking educators have found themselves in this situation before. Like, is this really necessary? Doesn't get any more fun, but sometimes it happens, right? But then you have some extra to that dilemma, but being the rest of the group looking towards the leader or the educator going, they're challenging your authority. What are you going to do about it? And at one point, I want to assert my authority, and another part of me is thinking, oh, maybe this is a good time to open up for a dialogue. So these are 2 examples of what those situations could look like. And here again, you see that you will get a scenario that you can use in groups for reflection and for debate and for discussions. And if I just walk you through really briefly, so you always have a case description. This is a short one. Depending on how many dilemmas you have in one, of course, you add extra info. Then dilemma is pointed out, and then I sometimes like to give options as well. And in my experience, those options often help the students see or the learners see what is my go-to solution, right? What are the habits that I'm already carrying with me? What is my default system? And that can sometimes also be a great eye-opener for does this lens still work? Is this reference still good? And then reflection questions to have them, seeing different possibilities in the situation. The more you do this with learners as they grow a habit of it, then they come up with some brilliant reflection questions themselves. The same goes for the devil's advocate. If they're used to, we always have this, oh, but maybe it can be seen in another way. It gets into the habit of how we discuss, how we learn, how we debate things. And it's really the hidden goal here is, of course, training with your learners to always think when encountering a new situation or complex situation, why might I be wrong? So that's what it looks like. And then we are moving slowly towards, question time. But I really want to go to asking you guys a question. And while you reflect on that, I'm going to share with you another story. But what we want to do is, of course, steer learners in this setting, steer learners towards the edges of competence. When you have the mismatch, where you have the disorienting dilemma, where you sometimes find yourself not being right, or definitely experiencing that mismatch. So in your opinion, in your experience, what challenges do you see when we actually put learners in those situations, right? The current meaning structures, your frame of reference, are no longer sufficient. Right? And while you think of that, I'd like to share with you just briefly another story. Because this situation in the story that I've previously told you about, that went pretty well, right? They leaned in, they started, as some of you pointed out, it's really interesting what happens when other stories are shared, and that really gets the conversation going. I also have tried to play that clip in a different group where they did not lean in. They leaned back. And what really thinking about it now was more the mood of let's do some displacement. Let's instead talk about how maybe that female combat soldier was just difficult. Right? So that's what happened. And it wasn't just, the few that showed the most resistance that I noticed. It was also the rest of the group that just quietly is broad. So just saying that sometimes working in towards that edge of competence can be difficult, and this is something that I've been very interested in and curious about. I used a lot of the work for Harvard professor Robert Keegan that works with it's a difficult word, developmental psychology. I'm not even sure I got that right, actually. Anyway, I'll link to a video for those of you who might be interested. But also just what we know is cognitive dissonance, right? So the view you have of the world, of yourself, it doesn't match the input that you're getting, and that could be quite uncomfortable. And a strong reaction can be to just make that go away. So as an educator, when you want to do this, when you want to train and work towards transformative learning, there's a few things that I have found is very good to be mindful of. And the first thing is, set the frame. How do I expect you to cooperate? How do I expect you to communicate? Right. So see a clear set of just house rules. And then that combined with a fair warning. I'm trying to do this, right? We're trying to challenge our views. We're trying to put ourselves in situations where we cannot solve this alone with what we have so far. We need the whole group's combined knowledge, skills, and competencies. So we need to invite in and take into consideration different perspectives. It's not about being right. It's about learning and leaning in. But, fair warning, it might be a little bit uncomfortable. As I heard a general say once, learning is uncomfortable. If you are sitting in the trenches and you're drenched to the bone and you're fatigued and you're hungry, you're uncomfortable and means you're learning, which is also true in learning in this perspective, right? Changing your mindset is uncomfortable. And then the last, and then I'll move on to the question is to, as an educator, if you find yourself in a situation where they react in a way you didn't hope for, try to see if it's possible to offer them your most generous interpretation of what's going on. So maybe they're not just being difficult. Maybe they're not limited-minded. Right? Maybe they're challenged, and that can sometimes feel very vulnerable. So yes, back to the questions. I'll stop sharing if that's fine, so I can finally see some of the comments and maybe see some of you guys. I don't know if you have your camera on.
Thank you, Annasofie. Just to everyone else, our microphones are open, so if you want to speak directly to Annasofie, go ahead and raise your hand and we can ask questions that way. I had a really quick and relatively silly question just to start you off. How often do you confront yourself with AI prompts to reflect on your practice? Is it after every lesson, or is it do you have like limits, or is it just whenever a question comes up about that you want to reflect on? Do you put it in there? Is it rare or is it common?
Well, normally I will set the scene for like let's try to train some dilemmas. Let's try to train some scenarios. I use ChatGPT a lot in my work, also to discover, sometimes what are my biases, right? What am I thinking that is a great idea? Again, I sometimes, but that's more like in my preparation, I suppose. Have it ask the question, support me in asking that question. Why might I be wrong? What am I not seeing here? Did that answer your question at all, Spencer, or did you just take it in?
Oh, no, that answered. That's another thing I'm just curious about. So if I was to summarize the entire idea of this, what we need to be doing in our teaching practice, I could take away from it, is that if we see we need to stop looking at disruption either from the learner or from ourselves as a crisis, and look at it instead as a teaching opportunity to both improve our teaching practice, so how we teach, and also to take the learners to a different place and make it actually relevant to them. If they are taken off their, the normal path that they go on, they're more likely to find that lesson relevant and interesting to them than if we just continued on with what we were doing. So those kind of disruptions are actually opportunities. Am I somewhere on the right track?
Yeah, definitely. So, so thinking, and if we look at our curriculum, there's most educators have some brilliant stories. Most leaders have some great stories, and that will enable them to find, what could be good trainable scenarios, instead of me telling and then giving you the theory that fits. Then invite in the learners, right? Because you can try to just push someone to what you think is the edge of competence, but you won't know unless you invite them in, right? You need their stories, you need their dilemmas, you need to have them trust you in telling some of the situations that they found themselves in, that where they didn't know what to do. So I think it's more a conscious way of using their prerequisites and their practice and their experience so far to train this. Because when we see NATO doctrine, it's like, yeah, critical thinking, yeah, resilience, adaptability, sounds good, sounds right. But how do we train that? And I think that's the difficult part.
And a lot of it is introducing, we were saying that introducing scenarios to them and connecting to points in their lives where they needed to critically think. Would that be the best way to try and get critical thinking and tease that out of them?
It would be one way.
Okay.
As soon as you, these are all suggestions, right? But and this is something that I found that for me and the learners that I encountered works well. When you get in the habit of training this, say you play a scenario, and right, and they combine all their knowledge, skills, and competencies, and we get so far with the scenario that we can. And then, of course, as an educator, you're there to support them, because that's a great teachable moment, because they're ready to go further, and this is where you have all the expertise and the knowledge. So you say, okay, so let's look at that to be able to go further. And then getting in the habit of, okay, let's train that, and they will help you on the fly sometimes, even to create new trainable scenario. Okay, so what about this? What if about you as a leader, you are in this situation where this happens, and then they help each other say, yes, and also, have you heard of that? Because I know from the second platoon that they had a and they will help you build that. So it's very much inviting them into what is being done and how do you do it,
and relevance to their own practice, like whatever you're teaching them, is how key is that? So if I wouldn't go to a group of officers and give them the same scenario I'd give a set of cadets to get them to. No,
not necessarily. I try it on, because there's some, and I think there's some problems that as educators, leaders, it's a constant, right? And I think sometimes maybe on different levels we will have a bias of being unique, right? This is problems only known by us. This is the situations we only understand. And to some extent that is also sometimes true, but there's some conflicts, there's some problems that's just universal. So every time as an educator, a leader experience themselves standing in situations that go like, oh, not again, right? Because it's difficult. And so some you can reuse, some not at all. But again, you will never just do it yourself. You will have the learners work with you on that. Okay, I have lost track of the chat. So anything?
Yes, sorry. I neglected actually to introduce you to Major Stevens, who's been monitoring the chat for us. Major Stevens, hello.
Hello.
Are there comments and questions? From the chat we should be aware of?
Just the last two, just were a couple comments. One says challenges where there's cognitive dissonance include fight, flight response, fear destabilization, and a loss of trust in the instructor and facilitator.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's when you were asking what other challenges, they were referring to that.
Brilliant. And I think we also touched, in some of the responses that you can have, but I think the last one is really important, right? A loss of trust in the instructor facilitator. Again, it's kind of a displacement thing, right? But you put me in this situation that I need to go away, it's your fault. So again, you tread carefully because you don't want that to happen. So this is why a fair warning, this is what we're trying to do. And even in those situations where they are frustrated, see if it's okay to just sit with it for a bit, right? Then do a debrief, maybe a group debrief, or do a one-to-one debrief if that happens.
Another comment, I'm pretty sure that the teacher has to prepare the students and cadets that their opinion, experience, and competencies are relevant for the development of the collective competencies. Mm-hmm. Served right, this might even extend the level of motivation. It is especially important when you're teaching specialists.
Yeah. That's a brilliant comment. So if you work with self-determined learning in Heutagogy, and especially if you look at self-determination theory, this approach will tick a lot of the boxes because it's their competencies are being put into place. They experience that they do have a say and they do have a lot of influence in what are we doing right now, right? They're the ones with the stories. They're the ones with the dilemmas, right? So, and also solving them, being able to, in a group, discuss and debate in a good and respectful manner is some of the things that are really important for motivation, especially when we're talking about internal motivation. But yes, definitely to have that mindset of it's not about giving the right answers. It's not about being right. It's about exploring in here. So we can only go so far on our own, but if we combine our knowledge, skills, and competencies, that's where it becomes interesting. Yeah, brilliant comment.
We do have one final comment, but I am cognizant of the time, so I'll quickly read that and then hand it back over to Mr. Spencer. Finding a frame of reference that the learner can relate is often the first steps to being able to teach a new concept to them. With respect to I can't pronounce that right.
Heutagogy.
Difficult. Thank you. It can be difficult for a learner to find their own frame of reference if they don't do that already to solve problems. Providing multiple scenarios that can relate to different background skill sets could maybe address this. Mm-hmm. Example, the same course content can be supplemented with different scenarios based on audience. Engineering course content this way could improve retention and understanding.
Mm. So yeah, great comment. So get in the habit of. I will never recommend just using one scenario. I'll always give them a few to choose from. Also to make sure that it's you don't want to throw them into a trainable scenario where they don't get don't have a clue, right? You want them to be able to do something and then meet their edge of competence. But the comment is really good because having the idea of what we can call branching out scenarios that you move with and makes more difficult. So you can say that the cases or the trainable scenarios, they evolve with the learners is a very good idea. Very good idea. So yeah, thank you. Brilliant comments. Thank you for being so active in the chat as well. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Annasofie. This has been a really interesting conversation, and thank you so much for your scenario-based training ideas. One of the ideas that we took away from your presentation, and it's really great you could join us despite the great geographical distance between us. And everybody here, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Major Stevens, for monitoring the chat and being my co-producer on this. It's taken a lot off me. Thank you so much. And I'd just like to remind everybody that our next speaker series is Wednesday, October 23rd. Our speaker is Andy Johnson, and he'll be speaking on metadata and its role in enabling AI within learning engineering. And then Thursday, November 6th, we have Dr. Summer Rubensky, who will be speaking on how modern technologies fit into the training ecosystem. And thank you for Greenland is just next door.
Yeah.
It is quite a trip, though. I don't think we'll be able to walk or drive soon, but maybe the future, you never know what it holds. Okay.
So thank you. And if anybody would like to continue this conversation, want to have more chats about transformative learning and heutagogy, please don't hesitate to reach out. I can be found on LinkedIn. So yeah, thank you.
Sophie, I just want to jump in. It's Bill Railer on this end. I just really want to thank you for bringing the human side to learning engineering. We've had a lot of systems sides and technical presentations, but really, you outline the importance of learner motivation and competencies. Thanks so much for the presentation today.
Thank you very much for your kind words. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Hey, everybody have a great lunch as well. I know we're all we're pushing the edge of lunch hour. So oh wait, we have a hand up from Mr. McCann. Oh, he was just trying to get his applause in. Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Wrong click.
Thank you very much. Okay, and thanks everybody, and we will see you next time. That's October 23rd will be our next one. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.